The Department of Natural Resources has some new responsibilities placed upon it following the legislation that passed last session on silica sand mining, also known as frac mining. Commissioner Tom Landwehr is here to discuss what those changes are. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
The Commissioner, let's begin with something that Senator Matt Schmidt recently said. He stated that the next 18 months are critical as state agencies fulfill their new roles. Now, one of the responsibilities is to create and grant frac mining permits to companies. So encapsulate exactly what this means to the Department of Natural Resources.
Well, you know, a lot changed in the last session, but what didn't change is that by and large, silica sand mining operations are still regulated by local units of government. So the counties still have their permit, their zoning, planning and zoning responsibilities, and they ultimately permit most silica sand operations. One of the permitting responsibilities that did change, however, was a result of Senator Schmidt's legislative initiative, strongly supported by the governor, and that was, we know that if you get too close to a trout stream, there can possibly be negative benefits or negative impacts if you don't measure that very carefully. So one of the permits that was created was that for all new silica sand operations within 1 mile of a designated trout stream, the proponent has to get a permit from the Department of Natural Resources. So when you look at we have an official map of designated trout streams. When you look at that, you put a 1 mile buffer around that. Anybody who wants to propose a silica sand operation within that 1 mile buffer has to come to the department for a permit. And as part of our permit review, we require that they do a hydrogeologic analysis. So they have to identify where the groundwater is, direction the groundwater is flowing, what potential impacts might be from both the silica sand removal as well as any water removal that might have to be done as part of the operation. And then we'll analyze that data and determine whether or not there will be an impact on the trout streams. And obviously if there's going to be an impact, or if we're concerned about an impact, we'll deny the permit.
And you spoke a little bit about local governments and the authority that they still have, and they can still put in place a moratorium on silica sand mining. But the 2-year statewide moratorium was eventually stripped from the legislation. Now, critics argue that taking that provision out kind of resulted in a piecemeal approach to overseeing silica sand mining in the state, and it's not a comprehensive one. Would you agree with that, or do you think that what was passed is good?
Prior to the legislative session and continuing on now, this is still a local zoning issue, and so by its very nature, when you leave the decision making at the local level, it does have the appearance of being piecemeal. So one county can take one approach, another county can take another approach, and that was not something the legislature was willing to try and change. The permit authority that DNR got is the only state oversight really that's provided by virtue of the new statutes. Now there are some requirements for mandatory EAW and so on for different operations, but the only state real strong place for the state by virtue of the legislation is in that DNR permit. So it's always going to be different from county to county and even city to city because of the local control part of that.
And what about differing ideas with various agencies? For example, the rulemaking authority is granted to several different agencies regarding air quality and emissions. Mm-hmm. Is there consensus among, say, the PCA and the DNR, or are there already some differences, and how do you resolve those?
Well, I think there's a strong sense among the agencies that we need to do this right. So we're going to take a conservative approach, and I think that's true for all of the agencies, and certainly the governor supports that. DNR doesn't really have any role in air quality permitting, so when PCA and works with Department of Health and they come up with their guidelines, I think that they're going to come to agreement. I don't think there's disagreement there, but we aren't going to get involved with that. When we start talking about water, now water goes across multiple agencies. DNR has authority for extracting groundwater. Department of Health has authority for putting a well in the ground in the first place, and PCA has authority over water discharge. So we all kind of come together around that, and I think again there's consensus on the general approach that we need to be conservative. I don't think there's any disagreement on the specific approaches that each of the agencies will be taking.
And as you're discussing water, Minnesotans are going to want to know, are there trout streams protected? Are there springs protected? Do you think this legislation goes far enough?
Well, I think in terms of trout streams in particular, this will be a very good piece of legislation. Again, we're going to have detailed analyses of any proposal occurring within a mile of a trout stream. We have a good degree of confidence that will protect those segments of trout streams. There are other impacts, the offsite impacts from water discharge are well covered under the pollutant discharge program of the PCA. So I think people can have some comfort that the water resources, at least, are going to be pretty well protected. There's still the authority for digging the mine in the first place still lands with the local unit of government. So if people are concerned about, the impact on the bluff lands, that's still going to be up to the local unit of government. If there's concerns about traffic on the roads, which is really one of the big things that some of the communities are concerned about, that's going to be, again, up to the county and the local road authorities to implement controls over that.
So, Commissioner, I want to ask you about a June 22nd Star Tribune editorial on this issue, and it stated, Governor Dayton needs to send a clear message to regulators that the new procedures and policies will result in meaningful environmental protection. And it went on to say that the DNR should continue its advocacy for mining protections as it plays a new expanded role in permitting. How will you continue to advocate?
When I look at the permitting process, there are always things that are clearly permissible. There are always things that are clearly not permissible. It's this big area in the middle where there's sometimes questions. And my advice to my staff, and again the governor's direction to us, is when there's any question at all, we'll be very conservative about how we handle that permitting. And it's not our expectation that we are going to be looking back with regret on any permit we issue.
Okay, DNR Commissioner Tom Landwehr with those words. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the time.